Thank you so much for coming this evening to the second in our series of webinars on being a church with people at the margins. My name is Rue Stewart. I'm the Head of Public Issues for the United Reformed Church. And let me introduce our speakers then. So tonight's speakers on the theme of knowing your community are Vicky Longbone, who is a church-related community worker based in Derby. We've got Mike Hart, Transformation Director for Northwest Synod. And then we've got David Johnny, MBE, we should include in there, that's always helpful to mention, of the Grassroots Programme, Luton Council of Faith, and Near Neighbours Programme as well, isn't that right? And they'll maybe tell you a little bit more about what that means later on. And I'm really pleased that we've got David Hay. He'll pop up a bit later on as well. He is Church Secretary of Albion URC in Ashton-under-Lyme, and he'll be relating some of his experience of getting to know his community. So it's a bumper crop of experts and practical advice and ideas tonight to help you and your church to get closer to being a church with people at the margins. This is our mission for tonight and our continuing mission. This is God's work that we are joining in with. So I'm going to hand over in just a second to Vicky, but before that, Anne-Marie has very kindly volunteered, or been voluntold, to lead us in a short prayer as we begin. So after Anne-Marie, it's straight over to you, Vicky. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Rue. Let's pray. Loving God, as we gather for this second session of a church with people at the margins, help us to listen well, not only to words spoken, but to the experiences, struggles and hopes carried by others. Give us humility where we need to learn, courage where we need to change, and compassion that moves beyond good intentions into meaningful action. May we remember that Jesus so often met people at the edges, those overlooked, excluded, doubted or unseen, and drew them into community, dignity and belonging. Guide our conversations this evening. Help us to speak graciously, reflect honestly, and imagine together a church where all people are welcomed, valued, and able to flourish. And where discussions are difficult or challenging, grant us patience, wisdom, and love for one another. We ask this in the name of Christ. Amen.
Thank you. So I'm hoping we're all sat here this evening because we believe that God calls us to help the poor through direct action, compassion, and justice. Scripture instructs us to share food, to provide shelter, defend rights, and to give generously. It promises that service to the poor is also service to the Lord. Helping the poor is not optional. It is a direct command throughout Scripture, and Jesus' mission often focused on bringing good news to the poor and showing compassion to the marginalised. Throughout Scripture, there are calls for sharing food, providing shelter, clothing the naked, to care for the widow and the orphan, and generally the need to support those who have less than us. My favourite piece of Scripture is the greatest commandment in Matthew 22:36-40. I think it was one of the first readings I heard, and was a driving force behind my journey to walk with Christ and to become a community minister. The crowd asked Jesus, "What is the greatest commandment?" And he replies, "To love your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. And the second is like it, to love your neighbour as yourself." Love is complicated. What is it to love someone? To truly love your neighbour is to want the peace and justice for them that you already have. It is about supporting people and enabling them to improve their own situation. It's working with people and not for them. Community work is not about what we think and want to do. It's about knowing what the real needs are. Have you ever heard that church expression, "We tried that before and it didn't work"? There weren't enough volunteers, we ran out of money, or simply people didn't come. That's probably because whatever the it was wasn't relevant. Let me give you an example. There's been an article on the local news talking about asylum seekers needing clothing. So the Oasis Church decides to respond by setting up a clothes bank. They gather so many clothes that they've run out of storage space. They're getting ready to open the doors, but they're struggling to find enough volunteers. They finally open the doors and no one comes. With a little bit of research, they would have known that very few of those asylum seekers were living in their area of the city. They would have found out that there are a couple of organisations who work exclusively with asylum seekers, and one of those has a massive clothes bank available. Instead of wasting time, money, and energy, the Oasis Church could have supported this other organisation by collecting the clothes for them. And that's what community audits are about. It means that whatever we do to serve our communities is relevant to the community we are in. So a community audit will fulfil 6 purposes. Firstly, it gives us an understanding of the demographics of an area. It helps us identify any issues within the community. It will highlight the areas of need. It will identify services already available in the area. It is an opportunity to build relationships with individuals, and it is an opportunity to network and build partnerships with other organisations. It is so easy for us to believe that we know what our neighbourhood is all about, but we often walk around with our eyes closed. We know that we pass that big house every week on our way to church, but have we ever actually noticed that there are numerous doorbells? That big house is actually a set of bedsits. When I'm doing this as training, I frequently use the expression of walk and talk, look and listen. And all 4 of those actions need to be intentional. So here's my 6-point plan to doing a community audit. The first thing we need to do is to get to know our church and its members. We all think that we already know everybody in our church. We've had time together. We see them every week. We have meals with them. But do we know those people inside out? Do we know what their theology is based on? Do we know where they see themselves within the community? Do people in our congregations already have ideas and aims, and where do those stem from? It's really important that we find out what resources and skills are available. There are very many people in our churches who have hidden skills, and we need to probe to work out what they actually are. And we also need to work out what people are prepared to take on. There's no point planning anything if we haven't got resources in place. The second point is about getting to know our community. And my biggest piece of advice for this would be to get out there, to walk the streets, to use a map to highlight places and situations, and to pay attention to the small details. Now, I would never suggest that anyone should be judgmental, but what do the gardens look like? What is the parking like? What is the condition of the housings? Is there litter around? And things like that. They are judgmental, but they do give us an initial impression to work with. We need to go and visit other churches and community centres. We need to contact the local neighbourhood police. Councillors are great for finding out what the local issues are being dealt with. And the best person you can find, in my opinion and experience, is a good PCSO. They know everything. Google search, but most importantly, talk to people. To walk and talk, look and listen. The third thing we need to do is get to know the services and community groups that are already available. Draw up a list. From getting to know the other community organisations and churches, you're already partway there. But use Google search or any other search engine, looking at community organisations or support groups or something along those lines. Please be aware that when you are looking on Google, check where these organisations are actually based. Many will they say they were in an area when actually they're in a neighbouring area or a town or a city. Facebook is also a useful tool for similar local searches. This can be a lengthy process, as people will mention new groups that are less well known, and that's one of the reasons a community audit should always be fluid. Look at the statistical data. Sorry, step 4, look at the statistical data. This is not as scary as you may think. You may have enough information from your older research to focus on just one particular area, but you might find it useful to look at all areas. There are lots of different ways of getting the statistical data. Look at your local council in the first instance, because local councils often have these kind of basic community audits already done for you. There are two main places that I get the data from when I'm looking at it. And one is the Office of National Statistics, and that gives you the very broad look at population, accommodation, employment, and all of those kind of datas. But more importantly is the indices of multiple deprivation. That gives you the areas where need is where there is need. So, for example, you could look on the indices of multiple deprivation, and it may point out that there's a high population in a particular area. Now, that may mean there's bed sits, it may mean that there's houses of multiple occupation. It may mean that it's just in an area where families, particularly Eastern European families, are more than happy to have 3 or 4 families living in the one place. After we've done all of that, we can start looking at where there's a need, and we can start drawing up a basic plan. The one thing, as I said, that we have to keep in mind as we go through this planning process is making sure that whatever it is that we're thinking about is possible for us to do. The last thing that we need to do before we actually get this group service support set up and running is to go back out to the community and check that it's what they actually want. I know the other 2 speakers are going to go more into both looking at the statistics and looking at how you can analyse your community. But for me, the most important thing is to make sure that we're walking and we're talking and we're looking and we're listening, and that we always do everything that we are doing in order to serve our community and to serve God. Thank you.
So Vicky talked in her introduction about the use of data and the importance of data in informing community audits. And I'm just going to spend a few minutes now just talking through a couple of ways you might get into that without perhaps having to delve into the depths of the Office of National Statistics and things like that. And then I'm going to share a conversation with one of the church secretaries from North Western Synod David Hay about their experience of his church doing a community audit. So I'm hoping that magically Anne-Marie is going to produce some slides right on cue. Excellent. So that's who I am, and that's what I'm going to talk about. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is a online tool that the Church Urban Fund, which is part of the Church of England's social justice work, have created and developed. It's completely free. It's really simple and accessible to use. Yes, it's based on Anglican parishes, so you have to do some thinking about approximations and stuff. But what it does do is give you a very simple and often, and in most of it, very graphical profile of the types of people that live in the different parishes. It gives an indication about poverty, life expectancy, and demographics, but also the issues that are perhaps driving some of that. Issues about levels of social housing, qualifications, people living alone. I'm sure we're going to send some handouts around after this meeting, so you will get the link in those handouts. But if you simply Google look up tool cuff, you will find it. You do have to register, but it's free. So I just took a random parish in Northwestern Synod, and just to illustrate the sort of data you get. So Anne-Marie, if you want to sort of just gently take us through this next 3-4 slides. So this is where it's at. This is a small market town on the edge of Burnley, Padiham. This is the data for their parish church, and this is the first headline bit. So you see immediately that this is a parish that has significant levels of deprivation, amongst the highest in the parish and indeed in the UK. And then the next section, next slide please, just gives you some starting points about, is this about children and families? Is this about working age poverty? Is this about pensioner poverty? And what you see from this is that perhaps the issues are more about working age and family poverty, child poverty, than they are about pensioner poverty. So it starts to give you a means of thinking about what are the sorts of people who we might need to be thinking about how we support and work with. Keeping moving on, please. So then it sort of talks about some of the factors that might be influencing that, about the older, about people who live on their own, about lone parenthood, and about levels of qualification. And again, it's all presented in this sort of bar chart way, looking at the whole of the UK, but also focusing on other parishes in the same diocese, which is the orange bounds. Okay, next slide, please, Anne-Marie. And then it gives you some data. So you actually can see the proportions and get a feel for scale and the issues, and it provides those sorts of data. And for example, what I think is a really interesting thing is it talks about the difference in life expectancy, the difference between boys and girls, and the differences compared to the diocese as a whole. And so immediately you see, this is not untypical in terms of life expectancy, with boys having a lower life expectancy than girls. So that's a tool that's available to you online through the Church Urban Fund. Certainly when we've talked with churches in Northwestern Synod, many of them have found it a useful starting point to their thinking about the nature of their neighbourhood and what the sort of needs they might be starting to think about. Clearly, you may need to look at 1 or 2 parishes depending on where you are, but it's a very easy, simple tool to use. The second thing I want to talk about is, Vicky also talked about the importance of understanding what else is going on in the neighbourhood. And the Gather movement is an ecumenical group that is driving what they're calling the movement for recovery, which is about the faith, the connections between the faith sector and public sector, civic society. And one of the things they're working on a local authority footprint is around mapping of local faith-based social action provision. They focus particularly on 4 issues around food, mental health support, family support, and homelessness. Colleagues from the Gather movement will work with local church leaders around developing this mapping. And it's often done very closely between faith, civic, and health groups. And indeed, in quite a number of authorities, the work has actually been funded by the local integrated care board of in the NHS or by the local authority. And what this work does, it really does increase the visibility of social action work that churches are providing, particularly in fields to do with public health. Again, there's a web link there, but again, I just want to show you a couple of examples of the outcomes from the mapping. And this is looking at Burnley Borough. Faith-based social action. This was 63% of faith organisations responded. This and 236 different services identified, and the different colour-coded dots provide a footprint on the map as to where they are. Some are churches, some in Burnley are mosques, but it gives a picture of where those services are located. That's the overall map. If we move on to the next slide, please, Anne-Marie. It does the same thing for the different types of church services. So this is just an example looking at food and identifying that this is where, from the 54 faith groups that responded to the survey, this is how the patterns is. And what that means is you get an understanding of what else your neighbouring churches and other faith organisations are doing, and that might help provide some opportunity both to think about, well, what else needs to be done, but also how might we support each other. And finally, it gives you a list of the precise sort of types of services that are being provided from the churches and the number of services that. So there are 2 simple tools or opportunities that might give you a starting point, both in terms of understanding some of the demographics of the community and neighbourhood you're working and worshipping in, but also what else your friends and neighbours in the faith sector are providing. The second thing the final thing that Vicky very helpfully touched on was the importance of community audits. In Northwestern Synod, we've supported and encouraged our churches to undertake community audits, and in some instances we've also funded their commissioning of external organisations to provide those community audits, working with the local church. And I'm now delighted to invite David Hay, who is the church secretary of our church at Albion in the centre of Ashton-under-Lyne, to join me. And David is going to share a little bit about his church and their journey through the community audit. So welcome, David. Thank you for joining us this evening. Do you want to just start by just telling us a little bit about your church at Albion, its history, where it is located, those sorts of things?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Yes, so as you could probably see from the photograph that Mike put up there before, we're a large church building. Built, it's a Grade 2 star listed building, opened in 1895. We're based in Ashton-under-Lyne, which is an old cotton mill town about 6 miles to the to the east of Manchester, rather. Um, and in a fairly deprived area, it has to be said. Now we're based in the town centre, although when it was built, it was in a very busy part of the town centre. Then, as they changed the road uh, networks, and we're actually slightly out of the main footfall into the centre. So, whilst we're a town centre church, we're not really a town centre church in terms of getting people coming past. But it's been there a long time, and we do a lot of weddings, funerals, baptisms. So a lot of people in the community relate to the church, even though we don't see them on a regular basis. And as with a lot of churches, we've got a dwindling Sunday morning congregation. However, we're a very active church, so we have as well as our sort of funerals, weddings, baptisms. We have a lot of concerts. We have a lot of youth groups that use the church and dance groups, that sort of thing. So we are active in the community.
So in that background and context, why did the church decide to undertake a community audit using locality as an external partner in doing it?
I think what really started was a number of years ago, I felt a calling to become a CRCW or to get more involved with the community. So I did quite a lot of CRCW training, and it sort of opened my eyes to what the opportunities are and what the needs are. And I felt, whilst CRCW, I felt I was more personally, from a personal point of view, I was more needed at Albion Church in Ashton under Lyne, and that was where I was being called to work. So um, we just discussed with the elders, and we felt, what can we do? We had conversations with Northwest Synod, who were very supportive, and initially we tried to do our own sort of community audit now, which is easier said than done because you can get a lot of information off the internet. And I think what we found was we needed to get an external view of what was happening in the area and what the needs were and what was already there. So we then approached Northwest Synod, who again were very, very supportive.
Thank you, David. Can you just tell us a bit about what was involved in the community audit? I think you touched on the point about there being a huge variety of data sources. So I think part of this, from my recollection, was that part of this audit was about bringing together the data for the communities in Ashton. But an important part was also supporting the church in doing what, shall we say, was a bit of market research, perhaps, as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like I say, we you can gather so much information from the internet, and we all, because we all serve in the community, we feel we know what the community needs, and we feel we know what's out there. But this sort of opened our eyes a little bit by having an external one, in that they gave us some great pointers actually, because in the past, we've been out into the town centre and trying to engage with people, and our thought was, let's go into the town centre and let's ask people what they want. Now, I don't know, Mike, but if you're anything like me and you go into a town centre and you see someone with a clipboard,
You
you
run a
sort
mile.
of, I move very quickly
Yeah,
then.
so do
I
I.
avoid them. I've got a deceptive turn of pace. I can get away from it. So I think, so again, the locality were very helpful, and they said, look, that doesn't work. You've got to get them to people. If you want to find out what people want, get them in a comfortable setting. So we have our garden party every year. We have craft fairs, we have Christmas fairs. So they produced a questionnaire. Now, again, their experience tailored the questionnaire to ask the questions that perhaps we wouldn't have had that expertise to think about. And so at our garden our party, when the bouncy castle was there and everyone sat around having a burger and a cup of tea, we handed out these questionnaires, and we reached a good range of people in the community, from very young people to older people. We did the same at other events that we had. I think the only thing that I would say was sometimes the most vulnerable people are the hardest to find,
Mm.
and they won't turn up at your garden party. So I think with hindsight and with experience, perhaps we would have gone down that road a bit more. But they sort of helped us with that. They helped us know what was going on in the area, um, and again what the sort of needs were. So it was a little bit more specific, a more detailed report. Well, a lot more detail than we would have done.
Mm. So what were the particular things that friends at Ashton Albion learnt from the community? You started to touch on some of it, but are there any particular things you'd want to draw out?
It was mainly what was already in the area. We found out, um, again, as you mentioned before, where the sort of most of the needs were. So maybe it wasn't the older people who needed support, maybe it was younger people, um, and unemployment. It sort of highlighted areas where the need was, where help was needed most. I think that's what we found, um, rather than sort of us thinking, well, there's so many unemployed people, there's so many homeless people, there's so many old people, there's loneliness as a problem. It did give us a better an idea of what the actual needs were.
Mm. I certainly think that one of the pluses of using these sort of things is externally driven is they do help you focus down onto what the real particular issues are rather than the general. I mean, I'm working with another church in Northwestern Synod who also commissioned a community audit through locality, and that very, very clearly highlighted an issue about affordable housing for rent in the village, and the ability to keep families together in the village. And then we're now part way through a feasibility study looking at how we might use the church site for affordable housing. So are there any particular things that, from the community audit that you're now doing at Albion that you weren't doing before because of that learning?
Yeah, so we have reached out more to the community. We have a warm hub now every week that we have, which we're actually trying to extend that into maybe other groups coming in to do things. So we're looking to get people to come and do some gardening work, trying to get
Mm.
people actively involved with the church rather than just coming in to use the facilities for food, to give people a sense of purpose and involvement within the church. I'll just come in and come to some of the events that we have. So it's helped us to build bridges with the community. We've also we've got a new employee now who is our community church project worker and hub manager. I think what the locality report helps us to do, I think it gives you some credibility
Mm.
in that it's sort of said to people, if we go for funding to places or we're applying for lottery grants, it sort of says, look, these people are serious about what they want. We're serious about our project, our mission. And it shows that we mean business, if you like. We've got this evidence to say, look, this is what's needed. Um, we've invested in this rather than sort of uh, saying this is what we feel we need. We've actually got hard
Mm.
evidence
Yeah.
to provide that. And our new employee, he's using this information to sort of work with other agencies in the area, other faith groups, so that we're sort of trying to work together and fill the gaps, if you like, where help is needed.
That's great. No, thank you, David. That's been really interesting and really helpful tour. I think when we were talking earlier, one of the things you also said was the process of going out and asking people about it also reminded you of just how many people will claim they have a connection to your church because sometime in the past they've been there for some family celebration, one thing or another, and sometimes it's, you know, as we all, you know, face challenges around our congregations, it's sometimes refreshing to understand how important a place our churches are in their local community, even if we don't always see it Sunday by Sunday.
It's quite remarkable, yeah. I mean, we had a lot of people came to the garden party, things like that, and and people say, "Oh yeah, this is our church," and like, yeah, okay, I've not seen you before. Oh no, we got married here, or our granddaughter got baptized here. So yeah, it is sort of it's quite uplifting really, that people do recognise it as their church. And so we're just trying to get more involved with them really and say, look, we're not just here Sunday morning, we are part of the community. And so that's quite, it just gives you some encouragement anyway.
That's brilliant. Thank you for that, David. It's much appreciated, and we hope that the work continues to bear fruit.
Thank you, Mike, and thanks to everyone at Northwestern. They have been very supportive, so thank you for
great.
that.
Thank you for that, David. I think we're handing back to Rue very briefly at this point.
Yes, very briefly. Just to say thank you for those who have already added things to our Q&A. If you're not quite sure where that is, look under the More 3 dots at the bottom of your screen, and you should see an option there which says Q&A on it, and you can add questions in there, and we'll look forward to answering those in just a few minutes' time. First of all, we're going to have Johnny's going to come and tell us about his experience in Luton and beyond, and then we'll have Q&A after that. All right, so it's over to Johnny.
Good evening, everyone. I was really nervous to accept the invitation to speak tonight, but I was assured that we have two very good speakers whom we have just heard, and that in their company I should feel safe to just share my story and experiences with you all. So I just feel very humbled to be here tonight, learning so much already with you all. Friends, I live and work in a town called Luton, which is 35 miles north of London. Luton is a super diverse town where over 140 languages are spoken, and 55% of Luton's population is made up of people of global majority backgrounds like South Asians, Africans, Caribbeans, Polish, and Eastern Europeans. So Luton offers quite a compelling case study in the intersectionality and convergence of poverty and diversity and religion, and all the other dynamics associated with these. Just so you know how I got here in the UK, I was invited as a mission partner in 2001, soon after 9/11 had happened. And I was invited by the CWM, Council for World Mission, and the URC to work with the Christian Ecumenical Program of Community Engagement called Grassroots in Luton. Just to say a little bit about Grassroots, it works in dialogue and partnership with churches and with different faith communities to engage with contemporary issues of our times as they are listed on the screen. Please don't bother reading about everything, just to give you an idea. Grassroots was founded in 1991 by Christian Aid and Methodist Church, but soon it emerged as a network of various Christian organizations. But currently, Grassroots is supported by the 4 church denominations, which include Anglicans, Methodists, United Reformed Church, and Catholics. You can see on this slide that I have put in bold and have underlined the word partnership. It's because recognizing Martin Luther King's statement that before you finish breakfast, you have depended on half the world, Grassroots identifies itself being vulnerable and dependent on others. And therefore, empowerment for Grassroots is not about gaining and owning the power and then distributing it to others. It is rather being alongside people. It's accompanying people so that as weak and as vulnerable little drops we might be, but when we come together, we can become the force of an ocean. So let me share a few examples how we have worked in partnership over the years with different people and different organizations. And the first example is about community cohesion and interfaith relations work. Grassroots could have easily done this work by itself, but we chose to work differently. Before we started the work, we actually invested, which according to many funders could be termed as that we wasted, but that was an investment for us, investment of our time and energy to build trust and relationships, and then identify and invite people from different faiths and ethnic backgrounds to come together so that together we can think through the issues affecting our lives, and then together we can think of the best ways of responding to those issues. And as a result of this, Grassroots gave birth to Luton Council of Faiths that won Queen's Award in 2021 for its voluntary services of over 2 decades by members from Luton's diverse communities. In another project called Spirituality of Justice, Grassroots gave birth to Making Luton a Fair Trade Town campaign. In order to nourish and in order to sustain this campaign, Grassroots gave birth to Luton's multi-faith fair trade steering group, which included members of all ages and different religious and professional backgrounds. And they were given an Outstanding Achievement Award by the Fair Trade Foundation of the UK for their work on this campaign. And then to work with women across different faiths and cultures, Grassroots gave birth to a local women's group called Ghar Se Ghar, which are Hindi and Urdu language words meaning home to home. And to do the church-related community work project, we invited former CRCW Karen Campbell to work in partnership with the Council of Churches in Luton. And we titled the project report as Seeds on the Wind, because there were many seeds that were sown during the lifetime of this project, and some have taken very strong roots. So it is evident from all these partnership models that Grassroots believes in the feminine energy, and therefore, with the help of the Holy Spirit, Grassroots conceives ideas, and then it becomes pregnant with those ideas and delivers the newborn initiatives, kind of, you can say, fresh expressions of mission, not necessarily expecting people to come to the church, but encouraging people to put their faith in action wherever and however they can for the common good. And I'll give you a brief example of that Luton is 69th most deprived local authority in England, and its 9 neighbourhoods rank in the top 10% most deprived areas in the country. And in 2021, Luton had the highest percentage of unhoused people in the UK outside London. Thankfully, that statistic has changed now. However, yet despite such high deprivation levels, Luton has been ranked as the top 3rd amongst the most generous areas in the UK, according to Just Giving data. This is possibly because Luton's 78% population is religiously affiliated. And that is remarkable given the fact that Britain is increasingly becoming secular, and Luton therefore is blessed to have such a high percentage of our population that is religiously affiliated. However, contradicting this generous image of Luton, Luton has also been labeled many times as the crappiest town in the country, a town which is a hotbed of extremism, a town which has been a breeding ground for terrorists. And all this is because the criminals behind the London bombing in 2005, 7/7 bombing, while traveling from Leeds to London, had decided to park their car in Luton, and they are seen in the top right-hand CCTV image, entering Luton train station to board the train from Luton to London. And then in 2009, when the British Army regiment called the Royal Anglian Army was coming back home from the war in Afghanistan, at their homecoming parade in Luton, a small group of just 5 Muslim fanatics were allowed to protest. Please don't worry about reading everything. It's just to show you some images to give you an impression. I say they were allowed to protest because despite multiple requests and a public campaign by Luton's over 50,000 Muslim population, police said they had no powers to stop these 5 Muslim men because it was their right of freedom of speech. And so in a town of over 50,000 Muslims, just 5 Muslim fanatics had managed to tarnish the image of Islam and of all the Muslims as well. They carried very provocative and hugely insulting placards, as can be seen in this image. And this infuriated masses, in the far-right extremist group called the English Defence League, popularly known as the EDL, was born in Luton. In 2012, EDL gathered in Luton over 3,000 protesters from all over Europe. Now they carried equally provocative and insulting placards. So with 3,000 protesters gathered in one part of the town and over 1,000 local residents gathered in another part of the town, it seemed like Luton had become the epicenter of the global clash of civilizations. However, we mobilized communities to once again put their faith in action and stand together in harmony. Numerous local faith and community leaders, including women from different faiths, encouraged people not to react in aggression and not to react to the extremist narratives, but act calmly and hold the peace and integrity of our town. We turned the town hall purple, proclaiming Luton is in harmony. We distributed cakes, we celebrated diversity. We portrayed a united front of all cultures, not just tolerating one another, but celebrating one another. And thankfully, as a result of our efforts, the biggest far-right demonstration in Luton passed away peacefully. Nothing happened and Luton won its battle in many ways. And this is because we trained and equipped and deployed local faith leaders as community mediators. They proclaimed the message that today is the moment of peace. They encouraged people to be remembered for the trouble you stopped than the trouble you started. So to stop the restless mob of our local communities and young people from clashing with the EDL protesters, besides our community mediation, we had also formed a human chain, a human shield of respected faith and community leaders. Since then, our community mediation and our work in partnership with the police has been well recognized and honored over the years. And we have since then never stopped creating safe spaces for people to stand together in solidarity with one another, whether it's Black Lives Matter or it's climate justice solidarity demonstration. We continue to join hands with one another, strengthening friendships with one another across different faiths. And despite the doom and gloom in our world, we keep lighting a candle than to curse the darkness. So to briefly reflect on the session title that I was given for tonight, may I say that Grassroots Luton has developed a practical understanding of its neighborhood through its long-term presence, of course, but primarily through relational engagement, which is faith-sensitive and culturally literate, and through partnership working, of course, and continuous listening, rather than relying on short-term consultations or abstract data alone, which was produced and has been produced over the years in abundance in Luton. Having such deprivation levels has attracted a lot of funding, and that has also attracted a lot of consultants from outside who come and do produce lots and lots of reports. So for over 30 years, Grassroots has been constantly reviewing demographic changes, social tensions, migration patterns, evolving faith dynamics, and the emerging tone and patterns of extremism, which has also been changing significantly over the last decade. In addition to traditional mapping, Grassroots uses relational mapping too, which I personally call as a thermometer theology. That is, assessing how circumstances are dictating people's moods and affecting communal mindsets and behaviors, and if there are shifts in trust and perception. In other words, such relational mapping provides access to neighborhood level intelligence without surveillance, including early signs of tension, isolation, or even misinformation, which became very handy in the follow-up of the riots that took place after the Southport attacks had happened on young girls. And that's how we were able to prevent any riots in Luton. The other thing I would want to say is that, as you have seen in the slide presentation, our work has been full of action. So I would want to highlight that listening through action, not just consultation, has also been very important for us. By that, what I mean is that we do not rely on surveys alone. Instead, we listen through engagement with women and youth-led and other marginalized networks. We listen through shared projects, training sessions, crisis response. And all this helps us to capture fear and fatigue and hope and resilience that formal consultations often miss out on. In other words, as Vicky and Mike both have highlighted, that we must keep our eyes and ears always open. At grassroots, we understand Luton as a multi-layered faith-based ecosystem. We remain sensitive to different theological rhythms, different leadership structures with multiple diverse cultural expressions within the same faith tradition as well. So to conclude, I would want to say that it has all been about listening to people, accompanying people in their joys and sorrows, which resulted in building trusting relationships with mutual respect and recognition of a common purpose. And gradually, people started to transition from being people of the moment to becoming people of the movement. And finally, may I finish with these words of Margaret Mead that are my favorite words. And I have noticed that someone called Daphne Beale has also joined, and it is through her that I came across this quote, and I've still kept it with me over 2 decades. And it says, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful and committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has." Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Johnny. That was an exceptionally helpful insight into what you have been doing and labouring for many years over. Really, thank you. And I really feel that it is a moment for us to really reflect on as we see a rise in far-right ideologies and violence and extremism in some of our towns and cities, and even in some rural contexts as well, that actually the work that you have been developing over years has really, borne great fruit, and the rest of us perhaps are on a lot of catch up now to try and get that same level of community understanding and engagement. So thank you so much for what you've contributed. You came in so humbly, but we are the ones who've been very blessed by having you with us. So thank you so much for sharing that. We're going to move into Q&A. So Ronnie, perhaps you can bring everyone back onto the screen, all of our contributors tonight, and we'll have a little bit of Q&A. I'm going to start with the people who have written in their questions on the Q&A, and you're still very welcome to use that feature if you would like to, but also you're very welcome to, in a moment, unmute and share your questions as well. And don't just think that the 5 or 6 people that you see on the screen have got all the answers. They probably have some of the answers, but there may be other people in the room tonight, others of you who do have other things that you'd like to share and contribute from your experience and your contexts as well. So let's see, Ronnie, if we can get the main people back on the screen again who've been contributing tonight. That would be really helpful. I'm going to ask the first question, as I have the privilege of doing so, and then we'll go on to the Q&A. My first question is going to be for any of you who want to answer, and really it reflects on me probably quite badly, in that I'm someone who doesn't want to wait. I want to just get on and do the action. I want to go and do the activity. So obviously you're saying it's not just about leaping in to do the action. Sometimes you need to wait, take stock, do a bit of research before you take the action. So, okay, I'm hearing that, I'm listening to that. So the question really is, what's the next step? So we really don't want to be assuming things about people, even with good data. So how do we make sure that the data really helps us to understand the people behind the data, so we're not making assumptions? And what would the next step be for someone who's on this journey? They've taken the time to understand their community. What do they do next? So that's open to anyone who'd like to share.
I think what the research and stuff will give you is a sense of what the sorts of questions you might be wanting to ask. But there's actually no substitute for a stretch of solid listening to the people in the community. I mean, I think the webinar we're going to run in later on this year around community organising would be incredibly helpful for people around that process of listening and building relationships, because I think that's really key to the next stage. And I mean, David talked about it a bit in terms of their experience through their, just in terms of people coming to them through their garden fates and things like that. But it is in, Johnny talked great about the importance of relationship building and that relational power. But in that and in listening to people in an open manner, I think that's where the next steps come.
Thanks, Mike. Anyone else wanted to answer?
I think within part of within part of that response, it's how do we get the community involved in whatever we feel part of the solution is, rather than us going, right, this is what we've seen and this is what we're going to do. It's actually about going to the community and saying, this is what we've seen. How can we work together to make it better? It's not relying on us as churches or us as individuals to actually go and do the stuff. It's about how do we work together to achieve both what we want and what you want. Partnerships constantly. Relationships and partnerships, it's the way forward with all of our community ministry.
Thank you, Vicky. Thank you. That's very good. It reinforces that idea about being with, listening, responding, but being with, not doing for or doing to. Isn't that right? So it takes us back to our first webinar as well. Very good. Johnny, did you have something else you wanted to add to that?
I think Vicky has said it quite efficiently. I will just maybe add the phrase that I've often learned to use is not to react, but to respond. And when we try to seek to respond, that requires a little bit more space for grace and more patience and more learning and listening, and then more accompanying people and encouraging them to be part of the action rather than we trying to act on their behalf.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful. I hope it's helpful for others as well. Let's go on to the Q&A. I'm going to start with whichever one is at the top, and that's Andrew Randall. If you quickly unmute, you could ask this yourself. Otherwise, I'll read it out for you, and we'll ask people if they'd like to respond. Can we get a list of companies that do community audits? So I'm thinking there, perhaps, I'm not speaking on anyone else's behalf, but this is something we can put into our information sheet that we'll be sending out later on this week. If we can get a list of companies that do community audits. I'm also thinking that we would welcome your ideas as well. Everyone in the room, if you have been involved in this and you've asked particular companies to do audits, if you can recommend them, please do share those as well, because we might not know all of them. But Mike Hart, what were you thinking about that?
I mean, I think there's some we can do, but often it's actually about finding organisations that are local to you who do this sort of thing, because they'll bring a much more refined knowledge than someone from the other end of the country. So I think, yeah, if people could share, that would be really helpful.
Fantastic. All right, thank you. Let's not labor that one too much because we can do that, I think, over emails as well. That would be hopefully helpful for you, Andrew, and for others. Audrey asks, what were the questions which Northwestern Synod suggested to Ashton Underline, please? Anyone remember?
Well, I think let's be clear, we didn't suggest questions. David might want to provide some illustrations of the sort of questions that locality suggested they asked that they hadn't thought of before. So I'll let David scratch it, see if he can remember any particular gems.
Nothing in particular as such that you wouldn't know that hasn't been discussed already. Obviously, it was to find out. We've got the sort of general demographics of the area. That was fairly, that was fairly straightforward, which was fairly self-explanatory. But it was just getting a bit deeper and a bit more refined into what was, what the area, what was happening in the area, and what just where the gaps were really, where we felt there was a need. And so I think those were the questions. I think you tend to. It was 2 or 3 years ago when we did this, so. My memory isn't great, but I think if you have a dialogue with one of these companies and they will sort of prompt you and they will probe and try and find out what you want. And I would say be specific with them and say, look, this is what we're trying to achieve. And they will then get that data or that information for you. And I think I would have a good discussion with your elders, with people in the community as well before you actually carry that out, just so you can make sure you get the correct information, or should I say relevant information that you need.
Thank you, David.
Thank you. And another question for you, David. You might not know the answer to this yet, but Andrew Randall also asks, what does this audit cost to the church or to the synod? That was a nice ask as well, or to the synod, or maybe Mike would know.
I can tell you that, Mike. Can you remember, Mike?
I think the audits that our churches have commissioned have cost about £2,000.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
In Northwestern Synod, we agreed as part of our small grants program linked to Church for People at the Margins that the synod would provide funding for churches up to that level towards community audits. But they've been consistently about the £2,000 mark. But if you think about the point David made in the Q&A that he and I had about the value of these documents, if you're looking for large grants and things like that, that could be money incredibly well spent.
Thank you, Mike. Yes, I slightly winced whenever you said that huge amount of money, but yes, you've redeemed it now by saying it could be worth it in terms of grants. But yes,
give it an investment, not a cost.
Yes, thank you. Hopefully that's helpful. Thank you, Tim, as well. Tim has said, like the participant from Milton Keynes, our church is in an area where there's a good deal of new house building. The result is that we have two communities, one very long standing in our historic time and one without much connection to the town or community. Are there any recommendations of best practice in this type of situation? Anyone like to respond to that? Two different kinds of communities that they're trying to be with.
I think I might encourage people thinking about that to perhaps come to our next webinar about places to meet, because I think that idea about community hubs and Christian community hubs, I think might have some thoughts that might be helpful in terms of how you might want to go about opening your doors to people of both communities.
Thank you. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, it's about finding where the links are between them rather than looking at the differences within those two communities. There are going to be similarities. There are going to be things that they have in common, whatever they may be. Maybe they all want to start a new football team or a book group, but there will be similarities no matter how different those two communities. I think Johnny gave the perfect example. Yeah. We can be so vastly different, but actually have the same feelings, the same excitement, the same dreams that can actually bring us together. I personally have a very similar situation where we're in a university city where my churches are particularly close to the university. So we have a very transient community, as well as a very fixed, stable community. And one of the things that we did when the students returned last year is we actually put little cards through every door that we possibly could. And on one side, it was entitled to the residents, and it had things on it like, go and tell your new student neighbours when the bins go out, and go and tell them, when their music is too loud. And then on the other side, it had to the students, ask your neighbours when the bins go out, respect them if they tell you that their music is too loud. And although that sounds really silly, it did start little conversations between neighbours who previously had this opinion that all students moving in next door were an absolute nightmare. But that very small thing that started to make them have little conversations just brought a slight relationship for something that looked polar opposites, but actually a shared experience that could bring them together.
Thank you, Vicky. That's very helpful, I think. What about you, Tim? I saw you unmuted there, or Catriona. Did you want to say anything else?
Thanks, Rue. Yeah, I just wanted to slightly illustrate, I don't want to take any time, but just to slightly illustrate the question. We are like Milton Keynes, which is, we're on the borders of Milton Keynes anyway. Our town is Olney, some people call it. And it's in a place of massive growth where all these new communities are being created. And within those new communities, you have people that I would call on the margin because they are isolated there. They're a sort of, they don't understand the situation they've moved into. And also they're frightened for many of the reasons that Johnny so brilliantly illustrated in his presentation, and the current moves towards extremism in this country. And they're really quite frightened by that. And we're picking that up, but we're not quite sure what we as a church can do about integrating with that community, because all the members of our church are from the old community, if that makes sense. So that's the sort of reason behind the question.
Thank you, Tim. I think that we need to move on from that, but thank you. It's very helpful. And also you lead very nicely into Roger's question as well, which was really making the point that I think that marginality looks very different in different circumstances. We can't just assume because everything looks tickety-boo from the outside that people are not feeling marginalised. And I think that's a really important point. Thank you. So Roger is asking for support with people who have learning disabilities, mental health issues, addiction problems, histories of violence, some people who experience homelessness in different forms. It's not just street sleeping, but people maybe sofa surfing and lots of different ways that they might experience homelessness. And so they're on a steep learning curve and they're still learning. Well done. That's the right attitude, isn't it? We are learning. And can the URC recommend any training? So Steve, thank you for your response talking about the indices of multiple deprivation. That's a really good point there. Helen has some advice about mental health first aiding that might be helpful there. But I think I've already written down those areas, Roger, that I think we need to be addressing and supporting and trying to find good advice for you. Mike, did you have anything to add there?
About 12 months ago, Theos and Churchworks published a report on neighbourhood health service, and there are a couple of guides with it. One is for health sector leaders, and one is for social prescribers in particular, and one is for church leaders. And that has some the very short 4 or 5 page things to do sort of things for church leaders is a really good starting point about connecting with your local health services, and that would be a good place to start in making sure you're better ready to meet those sorts of needs that you're clearly trying to address in a very positive way. So we can put a link to that in the notes afterwards, couldn't we, Rue?
Yes, indeed. Anyone else wanted to come in on that? Otherwise, we'll open the floor to other people to ask verbally if there's any questions they have. We've only got a couple of minutes left, but we do have time to fit in 1 or 2.
I think my response to Roger is you're already doing it. you're talking to these people, you're learning as you go along, and sometimes that's all you can do. And actually, I think you should be really proud of what you've already achieved, because you have done that walking and talking, looking and listening, and you've done it intentionally. And yeah, you might feel out of your depth, but you will keep on that learning curve. And I think you're doing an amazing job.
Thank you, Vicky. Thank you. And thank you, Roger, for that question as well. It's really, really good. Oh, there's one more thing has flashed up. Solihull URC, this is from Steve Faber, has formed a really positive partnership with the local authority homelessness team. We don't have to solve it all ourselves. Amen to that. Thank you very much, Steve, for that comment as well. Say the grace together in that glorious cacophony. Here we go. May the grace
of our Lord
Jesus
Jesus
Christ,
the
Christ,
love of
love
God,
of
love of
God,
God,
the
and the
fellowship
fellowship
of the
of
Holy
the Holy
Spirit,
Spirit
be with us
with
all.
be with
us
us
all,
all.
Amen.
Amen.
evermore.
Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you to our speakers. I hope this has been useful. We'll be in touch by email to let you know where you can watch this again and to send you out lots of info and resources, as many as we can fit in to an email. So thank you so much. Have a lovely evening, and we'll see you all soon, I hope.